The Bloodline got their revenge on Roman Reigns on this week's edition of WWE SmackDown, as it was Reigns who had had the upper hand for several weeks now, making his big return at SummerSlam to cost Solo Sikoa the WWE Undisputed title opportunity against Cody Rhodes. Then last week takes out even more frustration on the rest of the Bloodline. But Reigns found himself beaten down on this week's episode thanks to the big return of Jacob Fatu, who we have not seen since SummerSlam due to the injury, whether you think it's real or not. He came back in a walking boot here, and Jacob Fatu runs wild on Roman Reigns, and then they do the Shield powerbomb right through the announce table on Reigns, just like it's been done to so many before him, leading up to this big Bloodline Civil War. And now we get the visual of seeing Solo Sikoa, Jacob Fatu, and Tama Tonga standing over the beaten Roman Reigns, and that now officially sets in motion several things, but one in particular, as we know, is the fact that we are going to get that original Bloodline reunion. But there's something else that I think that we're starting to look at here and see a pattern that's playing out when it comes to this entire story. And one of those things happens to be what we said a second ago. Jacob Fatu did make his return here. And I think what we're starting to see, and you guys know we've talked about this in other videos, it's becoming more and more clear that it seems like when Solo really needs to do something big, right? He needs something big to happen to give him the advantage against the returning tribal chief, the original tribal chief, Roman Reigns. He can only do it via the help of Jacob Fatu. When Jacob Fatu is not there, what happens? We've seen what happens over the past several weeks. Roman Reigns is the person who's standing tall. He's running wild on the rest of the Bloodline. Now, yes, you could say in a sense, does it make, Tama Tonga and Tonga Loa, who wasn't even here with this, Eye Patch Tonga Loa was not here, but does it make, them look weaker compared to Jacob Fatu? Sure, but I think that's kind of the way this thing is working, right? Because it has been proven now, time and time again, that when Solo wants to be the person who, as you see here, is standing over Roman Reigns, he's got the Ulafala, just when we thought that Reigns was about to take it back on the day of the unfortunate passing of Afa, Roman Reigns goes to put that back around, his neck. It was gifted to him. Of course, as we know, that sort of, famous visual with Afa and Sika standing there, Reigns getting the Ulafala and all that. Just when you think that Reigns is going to get that back, it doesn't happen because Jacob Fatu makes his return and he makes sure that Solo is the one standing tall with the Ulafala back around his neck. But it all comes back to Jacob Fatu, and we've said that from the start. There have been some of those things that you look at now and see how long-term this whole thing could play out. This isn't just about the short term of knowing that we are going to get that original Bloodline reunion. We are going to get everybody coming back, and we'll talk about that in a second, when that could actually happen and how this is going to play out from here. But I think something that is becoming very clear, and WWE has teased it time and time again now, if you put it all together, Jacob Fatu is the common denominator for Solo Sikoa. When he is not there, just as we saw at SummerSlam, right? Solo gave Jacob Fatu just that look of, oh no, what do I do? After Fatu goes down with the injury, and he can no longer help him. Solo can't beat Cody. Cody wins the match via the help of Roman Reigns. And then, as we said, what Roman has done since then, beating down the Bloodline to where he is the person with the power. But when Jacob Fatu comes back, it all swings back in the favor of Solo Sikoa. And so I think that is definitely plotting something for the future. And we've talked about the possibilities with this, whether it is what? Maybe it is just kind of the point where Jacob Fatu becomes the new Solo in terms of being the big enforcer of the group, right? Being the guy who is really just kind of, going around and just pulling his muscle everywhere and doing whatever he wants and destroying anything he wants. And then, all of a sudden, he's the guy whose power starts to, get bigger within the group. And maybe that is via, The Rock coming back, and he's the one who actually sort of envisions Jacob Fatu as that enforcer. But I do think the smarter move is to probably at some point bring The Rock back. Maybe he's the one that realizes that, hey, this is really Jacob Fatu who's been doing all the heavy lifting here, and maybe that eventually leads to them kicking Solo out. We're talking way, way, way down the road. But you're starting to see, just like we've seen with other stuff with the Bloodline in the past, these are things that matter. These are the tiny details that matter in the future, because there are so many different ways you can go with this thing. And I think here, once again, understanding the power that Jacob Fatu yields here as the enforcer of this group and as the person who is kind of like the get shit done guy. Like when he's around, stuff's going to get done, right? And I think that's what is really getting more and more clear as we move towards this. And I think it's only going to make it more fascinating now to see how Jacob Fatu plays off of what we're about to get. And that is the original reunion with these Bloodline members. And now I think it's a matter of figuring out, okay, what order are we going to get these guys back in? Reigns now finds himself in that position that we've talked about. At some point, Roman's going to realize he cannot do this on his own. This was that point. The Bloodline he took out last week and the Bloodline he's interacted with over the past couple weeks is not the same, without Jacob Fatu. But when he's there, he needs help. He can't do this on his own because then that, again, we just kind of saw what happened here. I mean, he destroyed Reigns by himself, and then everyone else kind of got in on the action, right? But now Roman's got to realize, okay, he needs help. He can't do this by himself, and I think that's going to set up for a very interesting period over the next month because remember, SmackDown's going to make that move to the USA Network a couple weeks into September. So you would fully expect Reigns is going to be out of the picture here for a little while. We may not see him again until that episode when it comes to that USA Network swap in mid-September. And if that's the case, you're going to want something big to do there, and I think that's where what happens between now and then to get to that point. Do we see a Paul Heyman make a return? Do we see Jimmy make a return? I don't think we're going to quite get to, the Jey Uso and Sami Zayn part of this. I feel like they're going to be the last parts that come together when it comes to this Bloodline story. But you got to get Heyman back. You got to get Jimmy back. And I think now is where you start to see these things where, what do? Do you bring the wise man back? And he's the one who, as the wise man, starts to put the plan in place for the ultimate revenge for the original Bloodline members. And Heyman starts to, connect all the dots too and say, all right, we've got to have Jimmy back to help Roman. We've got to then figure out how we get Jey back. And then we need the honorary use, Sami Zayn, to come back into the picture, which by that time, as we've said, I would fully expect Jey Uso and Sami Zayn to be your World Tag Team Champions on Raw, while the Bloodline hold the Tag Team Championships on SmackDown, even though they've got a big match coming up next week against the Street Profits, who won just a fantastic match against DIY on this week's SmackDown. But when you look at it from that standpoint, I think you're seeing all these things that WWE is now put in motion, all the things they're teasing, whether it is what we've known for months now, they're going to get the original Bloodline back together, or if it's starting to drop those tiny little hints when it comes to what Jacob Fatu actually is for this new version of the Bloodline, the Rogue version, and how maybe that's going to impact Solo Sikoa down the road, because I just think that is something that, as you see this stuff playing out the way that it has, it couldn't be more obvious now that there is going to come a point in time where Solo is going to be kind of the weak link here, and maybe Jacob Fatu is going to realize that, or maybe The Rock's going to realize that, and that's how it all kind of comes together for whatever The Rock's vision of this new group is, Jacob Fatu and how he plays into it, all that stuff. Like, I think that's the thing. Every time, we've said this before, every time we think that they're running out of steam and twists and turns and all that, you just keep going a little bit deeper and you realize that, okay, there's so much more to come, and this thing's got a long way to go because there's just so many ways. Like we said, they're big matches you've still got to get to with Roman and Solo, Roman and Jacob Fatu, Roman and The Rock, and then, of course, the War Games match. There's so many different tag team combinations you could have. There's just so much still to go, and I think that's why it's kind of fun probably for WWE right now to be looking at this and saying, all right, we can drop in the hint about this, we can drop in the hint about this, because we know we've still got 14 different plot points we gotta connect month after month after month to get to where we actually want to go to the big culmination of what's next, right? And again, we're still quite a ways away from that. But, I thought this was an interesting episode because you got a couple of those things, Solo wanting to be acknowledged. Every time now Solo talks about being acknowledged, we know, his version of being acknowledged is, basically violence. And if Roman Reigns is not going to come out and acknowledge him, then he's going to get put through the table just like everyone else has. That's what happened here. But, it was, yet again, Roman had his hands on the Ulafala, and he would have had it around his neck, and he would have walked off and been just fine. But yet, once again, it's the Samoan werewolf, Jacob Fatu, who is the complete X factor for this new version of the Bloodline. And I think that was one other thing that you got from this episode. The original Bloodline reunion is coming, but at some point in the future, Jacob Fatu taking out Solo Sikoa, and Solo realizing he can't do it without Jacob Fatu. It's already there, and that's going to be a very interesting development too when it comes to the bigger picture with the future of the Bloodline. But you guys let me know what you thought about this particular segment on this week's SmackDown. What did you think of the beatdown of Roman Reigns from the Bloodline? How do you see the next steps playing out? Do we see the Wise Man in the next couple weeks? Do we see Jey Uso? Could Roman wrestle on the September edition of SmackDown when they make the move back to the USA Network? There's a lot of things in motion, and it's going to be fun to see how it continues to play out. But you let me know what your thoughts were on this week's Bloodline saga and the advancement we got with the beatdown of Roman Reigns. What's next? And as always, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button on your way out as well. And appreciate you guys watching as always. And your thoughts on the next steps with the Bloodline and what's going to happen next after the beatdown of Roman Reigns.